This is a video I've been wanting to do for a little while. There's a little band that I was really into when I was a teenager. I got into them when I was around 16 years old. And they are Tyrant out of Los Angeles, California. Now there's a handful of bands called Tyrant, but this Tyrant was with the brothers Glenn and Greg May. And their first album, Legions of the Dead, was the first thing that I had heard by them. And it is just a tremendous powerhouse, traditional hard rock heavy metal album. It really is. I'm going to start with Legions of the Dead. On their first album, they had religious themes, without a doubt. But they also had like the traditional... the first song on the album is a song called Warriors of Metal. Which is just a straight up balls out heavy metal song, traditional heavy metal inspired by the likes of it's like Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, that sort of thing. And what really sets them apart is not only is their guitarist, Rocky Rockwell, who's amazing, is honestly Glenn May's voice. I love Glenn May's voice. And what I read is that even though him and Greg, the bass player, are brothers, he wasn't their initial vocalist. They had another vocalist and some things happened. And so Glenn just kind of stepped in and started carrying vocals. And he became not only their vocalist, but their lyricist. And just a fantastic voice. So when I first heard him, the first thing I'd heard by him was Warriors of Metal. And then it goes into songs like the Battle of Armageddon and all that. But here is the interesting thing. I had the cassette. So on the first song, side 2 was an intro called Tyrant's Revelation. What Tyrant's Revelation does is like a short sermon that's made up of all the song titles, or at least the majority of them off the album. I come to find out, see, side A ended with a song called Legions of the Dead. And side B ended with a song called Time is Running Low. But if you actually listen to it in the reverse, you put on side B first and you end with side A, it makes way more sense as an album. And I actually asked Greg about it, and he said that they had pushed, this is how we want the album to come out, and Metal Blade just did what Metal Blade did. He said he really had no control over it when the album came out. They were disappointed only in how the track listing was, because it was supposed to come out a certain way, and it didn't. I'm a guy, when I want to listen to a song, I tend to listen to an album. So if I want to listen to the Battle of Armageddon or Night of Darkness, I tend to listen to the album. When I take the vinyl, I put on side B first, then side A, because honestly, it just makes way more sense. It starts off with, if you do it that way, it starts off with Tyrant's Revelation, goes into Listen to the Preacher, which is just, it matches perfectly. And when you end the side, you're hitting with Time is Running Low, which is like this very cool song. It's, it's got a lot of power to it. And then you start off Warriors of Metal, but then that would make Legions of the Dead, the title track, this 7-minute epic, the last song on the album. And trust me, it just makes sense. So I won't go into that too much further, but this is a phenomenal album by Tyrant, a brilliant debut, which takes us into probably my favorite album by Tyrant to this day, Too Late to Pray. Too Late to Pray is the logical follow-up to Legions of the Dead. This time out, however, it starts out with Tyrant's Revelation 2. Now again, this was one I had on cassette, but on the vinyl, The first track is Tyrant's Revelation 2, and it runs pretty much like the original did. A preacher shouting this sermon made up of song titles from the album. And in here you get this, I mean, some of my favorite songs that Tyrant have ever done are on this album, including the title track, Too Late to Pray, but you have the Nazarene, which is amazing, and the epic, and I mean sweeping epic, and one of Glenn May's finest vocal performances is on the song Valley of Death, which is phenomenal. And you get into this really cool song called Vertilac, which is like, it has, to me, it reminds me of when you're talking about metal gods and just like this kind of painkiller, not that it sounds like painkiller, but like this character who could only exist in the world of heavy metal. It is a really solid album, and it came out 2 years after their debut. Tyrant kind of have this Spinal Tap-esque aspect to them, which is they have a different drummer every album. And it is. The drummer on this album was a cat named G. Stanley Burtis, and the drummer on the previous album was a guy, no kidding, that they really loved. They sought to get him, was a guy named Rob Roy. So 2 albums, 2 different drummers, but the same core songwriting team. And yeah, the same, but you got Rocky Rockwell playing guitar, who's an absolutely amazing guitarist. Glenn May on the vocals, and his brother Greg playing bass. And Greg is the guy who's really still carrying the band on. He's still really the stalwart guy carrying it through, but Rocky is right there with him. Tyrant is Greg May, Rocky Rockwell, and Glenn May. But solid album, terrific album, can't say enough about it. Definitely check them out if you have the opportunity. Then there's this hiatus for nearly 10 years. I mean, it's definitely 9 years between the releases. Eventually in 96, they get back together and they release King of Kings. It starts off with Tyrant's Revelation 3. And you have the core 3 members there, the 2 May brothers along with Rockwell. And the drummer on this album is a cat named Tom Meadows. This starts out with Tyrant's Revelation 3, which is exactly just like the previous 2 that I was telling you about. But it's got some really solid songs on it. King of Kings, the title track. There's a great rocker in Fast Lane. My favorite track, and the one that really stands out, is this 8-minute epic called Ancient Fire, which to me evoked like kind of Black Sabbath meets Candlemass meets Solitude Aeternus, strangely enough. And it's just a fantastic album, and it makes sense with the previous two albums. To me, it doesn't surpass Too Late to Pray, but it is wonderful to have these guys back after nearly a decade. So I was hoping that they would continue, and they did, but they continued in a different manner. After a 24-year hiatus, they returned with a phenomenal album in Hereafter. Now, the interesting thing about this album is now we don't have the core trio anymore. Hereafter features Robert Lowe on vocals of the previously mentioned Solitude Aeternus. He also had a stint in Candlemass. And his presence kind of shifts the tone of Tyrant, makes them more Black Sabbath-y. It's not a Doom album, but they've had Doom elements before, like I had mentioned that in Ancient Fire and Valley of Death. They've had the Doom elements because it is obvious they are very much inspired by Black Sabbath. But with Robert Lowe not only handling vocal duties, but also, the lyrics and vocal melodies and stuff, it's going to go a certain way. And so now you have Greg on bass, you have Rocky on guitar, and now you have Robert Lowe with him, and drums this time out are played by a guy named Ronnie Wallace. Hereafter is a phenomenal album. It starts out with a fourth Tyrant's Revelation using the same type formula, except instead of screaming and shouting, Robert Lowe really does this kind of menacing lower timbre, speaking element to it. And it is really, really good.
Darkness comes as we beckon the light, but from the tower I wait until the day. When the sky falls, my bucolic pieces of mine shall wonder. And now all Tyrant dances on.
And then it kicks into a song called Dancing on Graves, which is absolutely phenomenal. Dancing on Graves, really gets you pumped, really gets you going. Terrific song.
Dancing on graves. Dancing on
And the title track is actually the big epic song on this album, and it is a really solid song. And it's really interesting how they do it. So you open with Tyrant's Revelation, and Dancing on Graves through Hereafter, you kind of get... So you have Dancing on Graves, The Darkness Comes, Fire Burns, and Hereafter. So I have it on vinyl. So on side A, you kind of get the big epic type songs. Like, definitely, doom inspired, definitely doom laden songs. But when you flip it and you go to side B, the first song you get is Pieces of Mind.
To break you, mending your soul, pieces of mine. Why did not me?
Into Until the Day and Bucolic, Beacon of... So you almost have like a doom-laden side 1 and a heavy metal side 2. And it works. For me, it really works. It's just a tremendously fantastic album because to me it is definitely the best produced, best structured album, and the lyrics are phenomenal. But for me, Tyrant is not only Greg, not only Rocky, but also Glenn. And obviously they can't do anything about Glenn. Greg and Glenn are brothers, so if it could happen, it would happen. But getting Robert Lowe was just a stroke of luck. Those are the 4 Tyrant albums, and I just wanted to talk about how much I love Tyrant. Just absolutely dig them. So anyway, thanks for joining me just on this little reminiscing trip about the amazing Tyrant. Definitely check them out. All their albums are streaming on Spotify. I actually created a playlist for Tyrant called This is Tyrant, consisting of songs from the 4 albums. I think it comes up to like 24 songs, and it's like 2 hours of my favorite Tyrant. So if I can put that in the description, I most definitely will. If you stuck with me this long, I appreciate you watching the video. I'll see you in the next one. Later.